Thanks, Sharon. Hello, everyone. Okay, I'll start sharing my screen. Let me know when it comes through.
Yep, all good.
And I'll just pop this window on the other side. So, okay, as Sharon has covered the initial bits and pieces about the framework, I'll just do a quick iteration on what all is involved in here. So it's basically there's like a three-step process, you can say. The first one is our orchestration studio, where we do the design and everything on the orchestration sides, which includes all of our components from the framework side. And then let me open up an orchestration as well, which I will be using to do a demo just to create like a simple customer account. So this is more like a simple org on the front end, but then there are different layers underneath it. This is all required just to capture the information. So I'll show you how it captures all the information in the framework and everything. But the first step is just get the org up and running. Then we've got a config control application, which basically controls a bit of an information about how you want to run the orchestration. And these more are like placeholders to store your variables so that nothing is hard coded. So to avoid a bit of a hard coding inside the orchestration side and give users an upper hand when they want to change things, like the process version in this scenario is basically saying what application version do I need to use when I'm running the overall process. And similarly, the UBE version and a pre-validation version. Plus, it gives you a lot more control on the framework area, whether you want to capture the JSON, so by which we mean you want to capture the input file, input payload and the output payloads, whether you want to do the allow, resend, because sometimes we do have a capability or a requirement to process the orchestration in an asynchronous mode, and I'll show you how it does. And then once we do the processing in asynchronous mode, we then make a call to an endpoint, which is provided by the third-party system again, just to send the actual response back to them. But if there is any failure or anything, then this checkbox basically allows you to resend that output back again to the system without doing any processing of the orchestration, all from the framework. Then there are three more components in here, which basically says when you want to allow the users to reprocess any input. So this can be three scenarios: not allowed at all, or allowed at any status, so that if it's an extraction of data from JDE, then you can basically reprocess it from the framework as many times as you want, because you're not really updating or managing the data in JDE side. And the other one is the unsuccessful status. So if you are basically doing transactional sort of orchestrations and you are maintaining data in JDE, you only want to redo that process if that's unsuccessful. Related processes, this is actually a bit of an advanced level where you want to trigger where you want to trigger the orchestrations from within the JDE system. So for example, if you want to send the sales order information out to someone and you want to capture that information at different statuses of the sales orders, then we actually create a staging table at the background, and the related process is basically relating it to that staging table. So to create a connection between that orchestration and the staging table so that they are all connected by the main orchestration record. Asynchronous method. So that's the one which basically defines how you want to do asynchronous processing. If it's blank, it basically does the synchronous processing. If it's 0, then it performs the asynchronous via a subsequent orchestration call in an asynchronous mode. Or if it's 1, then it basically submits the process to a UBE with an asynchronous call and then just close the connection there. So I will do a demo on this, how I can do an asynchronous using the orchestration now. So this app is required, this config is required before we can run any of the orchestration process, because if this is not there and we have used the components in the orchestration from the framework, then the first check it performs is whether I've got a config record available or not. If it's not available, it'll straight away throw you an error saying this record is missing. So once this is done and we have done the development for the orchestration, and once we've run the orchestration, so this is the framework, and this is the actual application which is widely used by the users. So it basically captures all of your transactions going through the orchestrations which are designed to use the framework. Then it captures all three different type of information in here. So one is the integration log, which is more like a step-by-step details about what the process is doing, to what extent it has processed, and basically capturing the minor details as you go. So you can enhance, you can basically increase the type of logging you want, because these are all components that can be reused at different steps throughout the orchestration, or you can even reduce it if you don't want that much of chatter in there. Then the other two files are the input payload and the output payload. So the input payload is the actual JSON that we receive from the requesting system, or whether it's been initiated by JDE process or from a third-party process outside. So it's completely just dumping the information that's been received to trigger that orchestration. So once we've processed that, then the final one is the JSON output. So this is the actual output response, which is basically generated after processing the full end-to-end orchestration. And then this is the same response which is sent back to the user, plus we capture it as well. So this changes slightly in the synchronous mode, because in the synchronous mode, there is an additional layer on the top of the internal layers, which basically shows a couple of extra parameters which are not available here. But I'll show you how that actually looks from the orchestration studio side. So in a nutshell, that's basically the components or the basics of what the framework development using, orchestration using framework development involves. So I'll quickly run you through a quick demo on this one. But if you guys have got any questions so far, just let me know and I can try to explain them as I'm going through the process. So I'll quickly check. This is currently in synchronous mode. So this is the orc that I'm actually going to run, which is basically just creating a customer address book record in JDE. And because currently it's been defined as to run synchronously end to end from beginning to end of the process, so it will show me, it'll take a bit of a longer time to close the connection on the orchestration and come back with the actual result. So I'll put in the data required. Give me one
Darpan, I didn't cover off with the guys, but there's a guideline set of standard headers that we use for the framework here.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And so you might want to just cover off a few of those so they understand
Sure.
why there's so many headers.
Sure. Okay. So these are, as mentioned by Shannon, these are the X parameters which are purely used to define or to capture the information in our framework. So the request type, so these, what I'll do is I'll put this on a side here. So if you see the top four parameters, these are actually, they work as a key or a primary key component on this control record. So by what does this mean is, like, if you've got a create customer, you can actually get a create customer request from multiple different third-party systems. For every system, you can have a different process version. So this config is basically dependent upon the values that are passed here. So the orchestration name is always a generic name because that is the same orchestration called by all the systems. But the source system here is basically what we are saying can be defined here. So I can have source system A, B, C, like, which will basically saying I can receive a call to create a customer from 3 different systems, and then I can change the version here for both of the, like, all of those systems. So this basically allows the users to reuse the same orchestration with different processing options or different logic behind the scene. So these are purely, so request type again is the third type of parameter, because it could be a create request or update request or delete request. So you can have a orchestration which basically manages your address book, but then based upon your request type, again, you can have different values here defined for that particular one orchestration, behaving differently for different request type. Similarly, there is another transaction type, which is just an additional layer down the track, which can be used to segregate. If you've got, supposedly we are creating sales orders, but for one particular business unit, you want to use a different process version, but for another one, you want to use a different process version. So again, those transaction types can be used. So these 4 parameters are here: X request type, source system, transaction type, and the orchestration name is hard-coded. The other one, XPK, is basically a related key information. So on our workbench, there is a column which is a related key. So down the track, what we've seen is once people start using in Anger, like the full orchestration framework with multiple different orchestration, it gets really messy to find the correct information in here. So supposingly, if you are dealing with a large volume of sales orders coming in, then normally we suggest to put the primary key as a combination of sales order number, order type, and company, and that will get populated here so that the users can go in and verify or basically search for that transaction straight away. Source system is the timestamp is source system is basically the system from where the transaction originates, like who is the calling system, and similarly it's the source timestamp. I will cover these two later, like just after explaining the sending and the send timestamp. So the sending system and the send timestamp is your middleware. So you can have one system from where the transaction originates, and then that goes into the middleware, which then passes on the information to JDE. So this is basically just capturing that time lag between when the transaction got originated from your source system and then when it gets sent to JDE via the middleware. So if there are any performance issues or anything, then we can actually rely on these timestamps just to see where is a bit of a lag there. Now, the conversation ID and the correlation ID, these two parameters are GUID parameters, which are the unique key on our framework record. So this is the ones, conversation ID and correlation ID. For every transaction coming into JDE, we need the conversation ID as a primary key. This needs to be a unique value. If it's not a unique value, then it should have a unique correlation ID. So the combination of both of them should be unique. Now, the conversation ID is again, this is just so why we've used GUIDs, because in the widespread API calls and everything in middlewares, GUIDs are commonly used transaction IDs. So then when the transaction gets originated either from the middleware coming into JDE or from a third-party system, we can sort of track end-to-end transaction with the same generic ID you used throughout 3 different systems. And if the first transaction fails, but the users want to still use that same conversation ID, they can resend the conversation with this, resend the transaction with the same conversation, but a different correlation. So that's the only reason why we've got 2 different GUIDs in here, just to capture that end-to-end process. I hope that makes sense.
If
Yeah, that's
the
terrific.
sending
Thank you.
system don't supply us with the GUIDs, is it a requirement for them to supply us?
Yes, for our framework to be used, yes, we need conversation ID at least at the bare minimum.
Right.
So, okay, I'll quickly see what was the last ID that I've used so that I'm not doing a duplicate. So it's the same thing. I'll give you an example as well. So if I rerun the process using an existing conversation ID, so which I'm doing at this stage in here, so it will give me an error straight away saying this is a duplicate. I can't process it. And we still capture it in here because we can confirm it. Yes, we did receive it, but that is a duplicate conversation. So I'll now run it for a happy scenario and hope it behaves properly. So now this process, is running a synchronous mode. So you see like it took 2.2 seconds just to create the address book record in here. So I've received the search type that I created. It was for a customer C, and I've got the address book number back with me as a response. And if I go in here, do a find, so that's my address book record that's get created. So in the framework side, I will see another record, which is a happy record there. So from the transaction logging, I can see this is when my transaction started, and this is exactly when my end-to-end process basically completed. So this, we are capturing if the address book record is successful, we are capturing the address book number here, and then we are also capturing how the internal process got initiated, so which was the synchronous mode in this scenario. So and then the input payloads, whatever I have passed in, are captured here, and the output. So you will see the output as I defined is slightly different what the users will receive on their end, because this is the internal layer that we called either synchronously or asynchronously. So which is in this scenario, because this was synchronous, so this is a bit different as compared to what's been captured here, because the output here is captured from the internal layer. We can't capture it from the very first layer.
Yep.
So that's that part. Now I can change it to run in an asynchronous mode within the orchestration. So this is basic. So that does give you an idea how this configuration can be used on the fly without making any changes in the orchestration. So if I run it now, that should come back pretty quickly without even giving me any address book numbers or anything. So if I run it, so see how simple, like it was pretty much 0.5 seconds and the connection is closed. So what this does is basically gives the input payload into the orchestration side, and then the orchestration hands over the processing to an internal layer asynchronously and close this connection. Now, the reason we have introduced this sort of processing is in terms of sales orders or purchase orders or work orders, which are quite heavy lift processes for JDE processing. We don't want to keep this connection open throughout the processing state and everything. So which is why we've introduced this sort of a solution design in there, which basically receives your request and then says, okay, I'm all good with the request. I'm processing it on my end. And once the request is processed, I'll send you the response back via the callback API. So if we go in the framework now, do a find. So I've got another record in here. So in the logging, I can see the internal process was basically submitted asynchronously, which is why the external ended straight away as soon as it has handed over it to the internal process. But still, I have got my output available with me within the JDE system because we haven't got anything configured at the moment to send it out to a third-party system via API call. So I can still go and check this address book record does exist in here. So this is how the synchronous and asynchronous modes basically work. Now, in terms of if it's not a happy scenario, so supposedly I've passed an incorrect business unit, and we'll run the process again. Sorry, I'll just change it to synchronous mode so that I can show you it does give you back all the error messages and everything. So we'll just run that now.
And the GUID.
Yeah, so basically, once I've run that, so I know the business unit that I passed in was incorrect. So the process will run, it'll start doing all the address book creation process, but then obviously it'll come up, hit an error saying the business unit is invalid. So and this response is sent back to the calling party, but obviously the same thing will get captured here as well, where we say the orchestration has failed, and then the users can go in the output and see what the reason was for the failure. And the integration logs will basically say, I've failed to create your address book record. So that's basically how, in a very brief demo, how the framework captures all the information and everything. So any questions on that or anything?
Yes, it looks really good. So if I understand it correctly, the meta information, or what we should call it, your keys into your settings here means that you can have different systems calling the same orchestration, and it should then behave differently, or you can have the same system calling the same orchestration with a different purpose, and then that will behave differently. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool.
Right.
And the processed version here, is that the like this record itself, or what does that point to?
So this is the version that gets used when I'm calling the P01012 in this scenario, which is to create the address book. So all I'm saying is when I'm doing a form request for the P01012, use this version to make a call to that particular application to create the address book record.
Okay.
And similarly, I'll cover up this one, which is the callback endpoint. So this is the endpoint which you can define once you are running the process in an asynchronous mode. So that we define the endpoint here, and then we configure the step to call the API within the orchestration, but use the API endpoint from this place without any hard coding in the system. So this basically allows you to have multiple different endpoints into different JDE environments. So PY can point to a different endpoint, production can point to a different endpoint. So you don't have to do any code changes within the orchestration. So these values are all placeholders, which can then be used within the orchestration just to avoid all the hard coding and everything, and gives you a bit more flexibility on how you want to configure your orchestrations.
Cool. And if it fails, the recent stuff, how would that work? If we
Okay,
would like to reprocess a failed one, for instance.
yeah, so supposingly I won't be able to do the reprocess here because I don't have any valid scenario, but this process has failed. So supposingly the reason it failed was the business unit invalid. So if I can actually, so as soon as we've defined in the control record to allow reprocessing only on a failure. So if I've selected a record which has failed with the status E, then only I'll get this option to say reprocess the input. So the reprocess input basically resubmits this input payload automatically from within the framework and then reprocesses it. So now in this scenario, what would the end user will do? Or they will go and see the business unit was invalid because it does not exist in your business unit master within the JDE system. So they can actually go and create the business unit there if it's a valid business unit, and then without even requesting the third-party system to initiate the transaction, once the business unit's been created, they can come here and then click on reprocess. That will just resubmit the full JSON payload into the orchestration back again.
Okay, cool. Can you trace individual service requests? If something, we can see the orchestration failed.
Yes. So it really depends, as I mentioned, really depends, because these are multiple reusable components as we have designed. So you need to reuse those components throughout your orchestration wherever you want to capture the information. So if you want to capture it after every service request, yes, you can do it. But if you want to capture it only after major service requests, this you can do that. So it really depends upon the solution design on how we want to capture the information or what important informations we do need to capture. That's it.
Would you, according to your framework development methodology, or what we should call it, would that be like the exception management, where you then trigger your service request or something to capture individual steps, or
yeah, so yeah, like in terms of, for an example, I'm creating the address book record. So the first thing that I want to capture is if the address book has been created successfully or not. Once that's done, then I would basically go and create, supposedly if I'm creating an AR account with that. So I'll go and create the AR account, and then I can capture the information for that particular one, whether the AR account process was successful or not. Because the address book creation end to end is, these are individual modules. So one module can be successful, the other one can be failure. In this scenario, I would actually go and capture each and every module. But whereas the other side, if we go for sales order processing or anything, that's one complete module. So I don't really want to do the capturing of information at different steps. I will only do it once right at the end, because if the sales order has been created, it is created with the full information. But if it's a failure, just with within the transaction boundaries of the JDE processing, it will automatically roll back all the transactions. So it really depends upon solution to solution, how we want, like what solution we are designing.
Cool. And the synchronous asynchronous, is that, have you solved that by using like a rule of checking the flag, and then you call like a sub orchestration, fire and forget, or not fire and forget?
That's right. Basically, it's a rule here which is capturing that info and checking that info as defined in the config. So as I mentioned, these are all configurable placeholders, the values which are then reused within the framework to make decisions. Rather than hard coding those values in the orchestration process, it just gives you an extra flexibility to basically turn it on and off on the fly.
Cool. That looks really, really good, guys. Would you say, with your experience of, you mentioned last week, Shannon, about you have 10 customers or something like that using it. Will it add a lot of overhead by using your framework, or is it something that you get used to it, and then you use like template orchestrations or something?
Yeah, exactly.
With these?
Yeah, exactly. You get the template orchestration, that's right, and then you build upon that, and it's just as quick. But the advantages you get out of the debugging and the logging and all the other components that are provided far outweigh any additional time it takes with the software development.
Looks good. Yeah, Chris, I don't have any more. I think I get a good understanding of how it works and how it's set it up, and we'll for sure be exposed to it at Coloplast.
Yes, yeah.
So it's going to be fun to get our hands into it.
Yeah.
Anders, do you have any? You'll probably be working with it as well.
No, I think you covered it all. Looks cool.
Yeah.
It's
fantastic.
a great idea.
Yeah. It's really good. It just put some structure around orchestrations, because a lot of big, especially big customers, they lose control quite quickly. So this establishes some standards from a development point of view, faster development because of the logging, and then you get the reliable auditing. So it's ticking all the inadequacies that the team here saw at Darpan and Justin saw in the orchestration studio.
I'm thinking if we have situations, maybe smaller customers that don't have an integration platform or something that can extract GUIDs, I guess we would create a pre-process and supply its conversation with our own unique GUID in those cases.
Yes. Yeah. Look, it's just a unique string. We use GUIDs because it's industry standard, and there's so many libraries in every single language. JavaScript will generate a GUID with a single line. So you're not going to have any challenges doing that.
Right. Oh, Chris, do you have anything on?
No, I'm really happy for the demo. Good stuff you have here.
Yeah, fantastic, awesome. All right. Well, look, thank you so much for listening in. Darpan, thank you for such an amazing demo. I really appreciate that. I'm going to end my recording now. So what I would say is stop.